Viewpoints talks about human trafficking after this.
Technology changed the way I listen to music.
Technology changed the way I plan travel.
Now, technology is changing the way people invest. Whether you're a multi-million-dollar investor or just starting out, Betterment is the smart answer to the question, how should I manage my money? Powered by smarter technology and personalized for your financial goals, Betterment automatically manages your investments and minimizes taxes, all for a fraction of the cost of traditional financial services. You just set it and forget it. With over 95,000 customers and $2.3 billion under management, Betterment is the smarter, easier way to invest. Isn't it time you use smarter technology to build your wealth? Sign up today and receive up to 6 months free. Get full terms and conditions at betterment.com/podcast. Betterment. Investing made better. Sign up for your free trial at betterment.com/podcast.
Anyone who saw the Academy Award-winning film 12 Years a Slave couldn't help but be touched by the brutality and inhumanity visited upon the hero, Solomon Northrop, a free black man who was sold into slavery. Nothing so bad could happen today, could it? After all, slavery was abolished in this country in 1865 with the passing of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. It might surprise you to know, then, that slavery is still being practiced here in the States and around the world, and it's a very lucrative business.
Human trafficking is a worldwide crime, and it is a $32 billion industry, second only to drug trafficking as an organized crime.
That's Melissa Sperber, director of the Alliance to End Slavery and Trafficking, a project of Humanity United.
While many Americans think that modern slavery exists only in other countries, it is also happening in our neighborhoods and communities across the U.S. Traffickers operate in very unscrupulous and often invisible ways, in that the crime is a hidden one. What we see is that both labor trafficking and sex trafficking exist here in the U.S. We know that estimates show 14,000 to 17,000 people are trafficked every year.
Sperber says that traffickers are supplying slaves for all kinds of work, both legal and illegal.
In domestic work, as well as small businesses like nail salons and restaurants. We also see it in construction sites and farms. With sex trafficking, we see that of both adults and children, men and women, girls as well as boys, and we see that on the street in forms of street prostitution as well as increasingly online. We're seeing exploitation happening over the internet as well as on the deep web, and so we're increasingly concerned about how traffickers are migrating over to the web in order to exploit young people online.
So who are these traffickers? Sperber says there's no typical profile. In fact, they come from every race, ethnic group, gender, and income level.
They're both men and women. They're foreign nationals as well as U.S. citizens. They're old and young. They're rich and poor. So there really is no one description that would fit all traffickers. The foreign national traffickers who are bringing over adults and younger girls from Eastern Europe as well as Southeast Asia and Latin America are accurate. There are cases of just that. But there are also cases of wealthy U.S. citizens who are engaged in trafficking in some of the most prosperous communities around the country.
In movies and on TV dramas, we see traffickers kidnapping unsuspecting victims and bringing them to the U.S. for the sex trade or as laborers in legitimate businesses. Sperber says that this does happen, but increasingly slaves are lured into servitude by the promise of a better or more exciting life.
A lot of times people are coming over after having identified what they believe to be a good job. So, for example, I've worked with one survivor who was recruited in Indonesia for a job in the hospitality industry in Chicago. And yet when she arrived in the United States after having paid a fee to a recruiter, having purchased a ticket, having gotten a lawful visa to enter the United States in order to pursue a work opportunity. She was then trafficked into the commercial sex industry in the tri-state area and spent time in brothels in Connecticut and New York. After her documents were taken, a gun was put to her head, and she was both physically and emotionally abused.
You might ask yourself, why don't they just go to the police and report that they're being exploited? Sperber says that sometimes survivors fear the authorities more than their traffickers.
Trafficking survivors are fearful of authorities, and that's often because traffickers use the threat of deportation, the threat of arrest, to imbue the victims with fear. So oftentimes the very thing that could enable them to regain their freedom is the one thing that they feel the most threatened by. So a lot of the work that has been done over the past decade has been to raise awareness about the resources that are available for survivors.
And that's where people like Kay Buck come in. Buck is the CEO of the Los Angeles-based Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, or CAST. Her organization works with others around LA and the country to help survivors escape from servitude, find a safe haven for themselves and their families, and hopefully help authorities find, try, and convict their traffickers. She says that CAST seeks to help victims at every step in the process.
Someone will call our 24-hour hotline, so our emergency response team springs into action and does an immediate safety assessment and then helps the person escape from modern slavery. So it might be that there's a young woman who's being held in a brothel and has access to a cell phone, so she calls the hotline. Or it might be a neighbor who's trying to help a domestic servant who's enslaved next door. So what we do is provide immediate services, basic necessities like safety, food, shelter. In fact, CAST opened the very first shelter in the country for trafficked women and their children. And then what we do is work with them to make sure that they understand their legal rights. We have a full-service legal program with attorneys who are experts in immigration law as well as criminal witness advocacy.
Legal advocacy is especially important, Buck says, because it helps survivors reunite with their families and feel safe and secure enough to help find and testify against their traffickers.
Many of the people we serve haven't seen their families for years, like 10, 12, even 20 years. And this is really sad because we've worked with moms who maybe when they left their home country, their children were 1 or 2 or 3 years of age, and now they're teenagers. So family reunification is hugely important. It's also important for survivors to be able to be witnesses in a prosecution, because if a mother or a father or even a daughter or son, if they are worried about their family members wherever they are, whether it be here domestically or abroad, it will be difficult for them to really focus on being a witness in the prosecution. So one of the key things we do is we help to get immediate family members who are eligible a TV to bring them here. And that way survivors have peace of mind knowing that their moms, their dads, their children are out of harm's way.
Not only do Buck's and Sperber's organizations help the survivors of trafficking themselves, they also push for laws and policies to prevent human trafficking in the first place. They're working on bills, both statewide and nationally, to make recruiting and labor practices more transparent and fair to the workers.
We've got a state bill, it's SB 516, and then there's also some national legislation, HR 3344, and it calls for disclosure so that all foreign labor contractors are required to provide full and fair information to foreign workers in a language they understand about the terms and conditions of work in California or wherever the place of work will be. So a contractor may not knowingly provide a worker with false or misleading information. So in this way, employers using the services of foreign labor contractors or brokers to obtain workers will be required to actually report these activities. So that's one thing that we can do to prevent this from happening.
legislation that's been introduced in the House and has already passed in the Senate as part of comprehensive immigration reform. And that legislation would regulate the role of foreign labor recruiters, because what we see are that recruiters are increasingly putting workers in vulnerable situations by not giving them access to verifiable information about the terms of their work, and then often exploiting them once they arrive in the U.S. by taking away their documents and making them pay exorbitant fees. So this legislation would prohibit the charging of fees and would also enable the Department of Labor to monitor a list of recruiters that follow best practices. And we really think that this would empower workers and enable them to identify genuine jobs, pursue those jobs, and then have protections once they're in the U.S. to enable them to get out of situations if they find themselves in exploitation.
There are also programs for local law enforcement agencies on how to recognize if a person is being exploited and what to do to help them escape from their situation. Kay Buck says that young men and women are especially vulnerable and fall prey to promises of modeling or acting careers, then end up being forced into labor or the sex trades. That's why she and Melissa Sperber urge young people to get the advice of a trusted adult, such as a parent or guardian, before accepting any offer of a job. Buck says that the public has provided tips in many trafficking cases. She says that if you know someone who is being forced to work or even suspect that human trafficking is taking place, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline at 1-888-373-7888 for help. In California, you can call the CAST hotline at 1-888-539-2373. For information on CAST, you can visit their website at castla.org. To find out more about the Alliance to End Slavery and Trafficking, Melissa Sperber invites listeners to visit their site at endslaveryandtrafficking.org. For information about all of our guests, you can log on to our site at viewpointsonline.net. I'm Gary Price.
This is Shaquille O'Neal.
And the Shaquettes.
Reminding you that anytime is a good time.
Good time.
For the cooling, drying, fresh scent of Gold Bond powder spray. Like after the gym.
Or a crowded elevator ride.
Or golf.
Or working with farm animals.
Or a hard day's work.
Like sportscasting.
You said it, ladies. Stay cool with Gold Bond powder spray.
Stay cool with Gold Bond.
For over 75 years, Geico's kept an eye on the future, keeping customers happy with things like 24/7 customer support and emergency roadside service. And to prove it, here's one of our commercials from over 75 years ago.
At Geico, we promise to always find innovative new ways to serve you. In fact, we're so innovative, in 75 years, they'll listen to this old radio commercial and think, wow, they were innovative.
Wow, we are innovative.
Geico, saving people money for over 75 years.